Yo, how's it going everyone? FreakyDude99 here, and today I got an amazing endgame solartitan build for you. This time we are centered around the exotic Ashen Wake for some really deadly fusion grenades that we just throw out constantly. Solar Titans are usually relegated to bonk, but I wanted something that didn't require me to get close and risky all the time. As in harder content, some enemies will just one-shot you in melee range, and with this build, that won't happen, or at least not as often. Of course, with all my builds, there is a picture at the end of the video, as well as a dim link in the description. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Starting off with the subclass, we have our Super Hammer of Soul. You get 90% damage resist and throw out hammers that deal damage, and on impact release 3 shrapnel dealing more damage. Every 0.5 seconds a hammer is in the air, it flares up, increasing its shrapnel count to a max of 6. You also spawn a sunspot when you cast the super on the ground, and every throw spawns a sunspot on impact. Standing inside these spots decreases super drain passively and while throwing, so you can get a longer super off. The goal with this super is to stay in stun spots as long as possible and throw hammers from as far as you can for the shrapnel increase. Moving on to the class ability, we have Rally Barricade, which during casting it we get 20% damage resist, and then while standing behind it we get plus 30 stability, 100 reload speed, 0.9 times reload duration multiplier, 10% damage fall off, and 50% flint resist. Using your barricade whenever you can is ideal, as the cover it provides is a lifesaver, especially when right in front of a champion. It gives our weapon some more range as well, so setting it up for your team is always a good idea. For our melee ability, we have Throwing Hammers, also known as the Bonk Hammer. It grants cure ×1 if picked up after it dealt damage, and has a 10-second timer before detonating on the ground. It's a really good melee, but getting close can be hard in endgame content, so unfortunately you won't be able to use it super often. For our grenade, we have Fusion Grenade, as we are using Ashen Wake. Normally fusions stick to an enemy and explode, dealing 40 scorch, 60 with ashes, but with Ashen Wake it detonates on impact, has fastball for longer throwing, and kills with it grant grenade energy, with rank and file giving 25%, elites 50%, and mini bosses and bosses 100%. Our fusion grenade can come back instantly a lot of the time, and the damage and scorch it does means you can destroy a wave of adds with just grenades. This also further gets buffed thanks to our first aspect, Roaring Flames, where solar ability kills and ignitions grant stacks of Roaring Flames, up to 3 stacks. Each stack increases ability damage for 20 seconds, starting at 20% at 1 stack, 44% at 2 stack, and 73% at 3 stacks. This makes our hammer and grenade do crazy damage, plus it also affects our super ability. It also has the effect of normal melee hits while Roaring Flames is active, apply 30 scorch, 40 with ashes, and count as powered melee hits. This of course doesn't apply for throwing hammers. And then for our second aspect, we have Soul Invictus, where solar ability kills, scorched kills, and Hammer of Soul impacts create sunspots for 20 seconds. Standing in a sunspot gives Soul Invictus buffs for 5 seconds, but refreshes while inside. This buff gives restoration ×1, 40% decreased passive super drain, and 100% additional base grenade and melee regeneration rate. So always try to stand in a sunspot if it's close enough, and not inside a group of enemies. Sunspots do deal damage and apply 5 scorch, 8 with ashes every 0.16 seconds as well. Now down to the fragments, where we first have Ember of Solace, making restoration and radiant effects last 50% longer, so the restoration ×1 we get from sunspots lasts longer. Next we have Ember of Searing, so defeating scorched enemies grants melee ability energy based on enemy rank and spawns a fire sprite. If we miss a hammer, then we get it back quick, and the fire sprite on pickup grants 12.5% grenade ability energy. This is pretty much why we take the fragment. Next up, Ember of Char makes ignitions apply 40 scorch, 60 with ashes, to enemies damaged by the explosion. This does not apply to the ignited enemy, however. Spreading the scorch as much as possible allows us to burn through enemies even if we focus the big bad. And finally, Ember of Ashes makes almost all Scorch stacks applied increased by 50% and rounded up. The extra Scorch is more damage, and with all the Scorch we already apply, we want it. And that does it for the subclass, and now we move on to the weapons. For the weapons, we actually have a good selection to choose from depending on the activity. For a main solar weapon that scorches, you have Polaris Lance and Skyburner's Oath, which are two great scout rifles that can stun overload champions. They both got good range, and with Polaris probably beating out Skyburner's at its range capabilities and damage though. You also have Tommy's Matchbook as an auto rifle for stunning barrier champions, and it can apply Scorch really rapidly. The only thing is you have to play a lot safer as the health decrease hurts a lot in harder content. And then there's Prometheus Lens as well for overload champions and for some solid Scorch damage, but just be sure not to run out of ammo with it. Since everything is focused on dealing with champions, depending on what you run, you'll use different weapons in your kinetic slot. Hand cannons for unstoppables, scout rifles for overload, and auto rifles for barrier. For your heavy weapon, there's tons of solar heavies out there, but for my pick, I go fixed odds, as its solar has good range and helps clean up enemies that get too close without blowing myself up. Grenade launchers and rocket launchers are good, but in most cases, a machine gun will serve you better. And that does it for the weapons. Now moving on to the artifact perks. Of course, it is not a solar season, so there's only so much we can pick here. We can grab every anti-champion mod for stunning. They also overcharge the weapons for a 25% damage increase in overcharge activities. Then we can grab all the authorized mods for cheaper mods. Next we go deeper origins, so origin traits from Season of the Deep and Defiance, Neomuna, and Root of Nightmares get enhanced effectiveness. We also have overcharged armory, so those same weapons get the overcharge buff. And then finally countercharge, so when we stun a champion we get an armor charge. And with the artifacts picked, let's move on to the armor mods. Starting with the helmet, we have harmonic siphon and kinetic siphon, so we can always generate orbs with our weapons. Depending on what weapons you run, you might have to switch these, and then we also have ashes to assets for extra super energy on grenade kills. For stat focusing, we of course have Resilience first for the 30% damage resist, as it is a godsend in harder content, and then we also get a lower barricade cooldown because of it. Second, we want Discipline so we can throw our fusion grenades as much as possible, and then finally Recovery, but only up to a stat of 50, because if we go over that then we're having wasted stats. Anything else can be put into Strength. Down to the gauntlets, we have our exotic Ashen Wake and its exotic perk Bring the Heat. Fusion grenades have fastball intrinsically and detonate on impact. Kills with fusion grenades grant grenade energy, rank and file 25%, elites 50%, and mini bosses and bosses 100%. It's a really great exotic that makes fusion nades busted and spammable beyond belief. For the armor mods, we have double grenade kickstart, which grants varying amounts of grenade energy on use. Without an armor charge, we get 17% energy back. With one charge, 23%, 2 charges, 31%, and 3 charges giving 37%. This lets us get our grenade back even faster, and then with one impact induction, we get 20% grenade energy on hammer throw hit. This is a 7-second cooldown, but regardless, it lets us spam our grenade even more. Down to the chest piece, we of course grab 2 resist mods for the threat modifier. If it's an arc threat, then we use 2 arc resists, and then we use a third different resist like concussive dampener or even a void resist. Onto the legs, we have stacks on stacks, so every armor charge gained we get an additional one. We also have innervation for 10% grenade energy on orb of power pickup, and recuperation for a health bump on orb of power pickup. And finally for the mark, we have time dilation, which increases armor charge decay from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, and then we have double Fonta restoration, which gives a plus 50 in recovery while we have an armor charge. This is why we didn't want to go over 50 recovery in our stat focusing. And that does it for the build. The ability loop is grenade as much as you can, place down barricades whenever you can, and then only use your hammer throw for close enemies or for a long distance shot to get back grenade energy. This build really revolves around being a Solar Titan and using your kit to the best of your ability. Your fusion grenades are going to be deadly in hard content, and while it's not easy, if you can get up to ×3 roaring flames, then your fusion grenades will start one-shotting most enemies. The moment you step into regular content like deep dives or strikes, you'll start blowing things up with this build, and the power of your abilities opens the door for you to run whatever weapons you want. It may not be your usual bonk hammer titan, but I find this build works wonders in Grandmaster Nightfalls. Of course, if you need a picture, there's one on the screen, and there's also a dim link in the description. If you enjoyed the build, maybe give the video a like and then consider subscribing. I have been FreakyDude99, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out, everyone.